All right, welcome back for the third installment of a virtual new member orientation brought to you by NCSL. Thanks again for joining us. We're going to talk about media and social media as a legislator. Some of you may be over the top familiar with social media platforms and have already mastered that throughout your campaign. And others of you may still have your 4-year-old grandchild running your social media as of today. And if that's the case, that's all right too, but we're going to teach you a few tips and tricks and things to be aware of when working with the media and also running your social media as you move into your official role as a state legislator. I'm happy to introduce Mick Bullock and Berkeley Teat of NCSL. They are our dynamic duo in NCSL's Public Affairs Department, and they work with state legislators on a daily basis to help hone their media and social media skills. And they both come from a background in that world as well and working with elected officials. NCSL, for those of you who are new to this series and haven't joined us for the previous ones, is the National Conference of State Legislatures, and we are the national bipartisan organization for all state legislators and legislative staff. You are automatically a member of NCSL simply by the fact that you won your election on November 3rd. So think of us as an extension of your own staff, or if you don't have any staff, certainly think of us in that capacity. We can help you with research, resources, professional development, just like this, advice, and connect you to other legislators across the country as well. So thanks so much for joining us. I'll turn it over to Mick and Berkeley.
Well, thank you so much, Stacy. Ladies and gentlemen, again, my name is Mick Bullock, Public Affairs Director for NCSL. And I want to piggyback off of one thing that Stacy just said a few moments ago about thinking of NCSL as an extension of your office. Ladies and gentlemen, in my former job back in Mississippi, I know, shocker, Southerner here, NCSL was instrumental in supplying us and helping us put together several pieces of legislation. Certainly, if I knew what I know now as an NCSL staff, or if I knew then what as a legislative staff, I would have been 100 times better. So please utilize our services. Ladies and gentlemen, again, congratulations. You are a legislator now. If you were here in person, I would give you a high five. So right now, I'm going to give you that virtual high five. But real quick, we're going to go through a couple things real quick. We're going to talk a little bit about media relations, and then we're going to move on to social media. I also want to mention that we're going to be throwing a lot of information at you. So certainly, please take notes. There's some great hints in here. I would say and I'm telling my age now, over 16 years now of experience, I would say that I've come across a few things that I've made notes about that come across in this presentation. So real quick, let's go ahead and get started. I want to take a poll real quick. I'm going to ask our wonderful Stacy if she'll bring up our first poll. And there we go. Thank you. How many of you trust the media? Now, be truthful now. First choice, of course, absolutely not, maybe, depends on the reporter. Go ahead and vote. You should have a pop-up screen that will pop up. And again, you have 3 choices.
All right, most of the folks voting. If the last few of you get your votes in, I'm going to end it here in about 3 seconds. Wow, that's good turnout. We got about 85% of people voting. Okay, so here are our results.
Maybe, depends on the reporter. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be talking a little bit more about that in the presentation. Let's go ahead and pull up the second poll. Have you ever done an official on-camera interview? Yes, no. Does my 6-year-old filming on my iPhone count? Go ahead and vote, please.
All right, got about 80% in. We're going to end the polling on that one. Here are the results. We've got some veterans here.
Got some good experience. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we hope that we will help you out with these 2 questions that we just asked a few moments ago. That way you can feel just a little bit better prepared. I want to go on to our next slide. I like to show this one. This is a famous quote, Mark Twain. Never pick a fight with people who buy ink by the barrel. Can I get an amen? Next slide, please. Ladies and gentlemen, whether or not you like to look at yourself as a brand, guess what? You are officially a brand. A lot of these signs and such up here, these, of course, these are presidential signs, no shocker. But at the same point, what I'm trying to show is that they are building their brand. They started building their brand throughout their career. And throughout this presentation, that's the one thing, if I can leave you with, is to certainly be thinking about your particular brand. Be thinking about, okay, and when I do an interview, should I roll up my sleeves and take the tie off? What should be the background? Is the background a busy desk, or is it the official seal in the background with the flags? Always be cognizant of that as you continue building your brand, because ladies and gentlemen, whether you like it or not, well, actually, maybe you do, I would say that on this presentation day, I'm sure I'm talking to some future U.S. senators, U.S. congressmen, governors, and other statewide elected officials. So as I always say, aim high. All right, next slide, please. These are just, of course, again, some of the interview tips. I'm not going to hit on every single one of them. One thing is that I always like to tell people about preparation time if possible. Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to come into contact with reporters that's going to take their own deadline. That's right. But guess what, ladies and gentlemen, they're coming to you for information. A lot of times in my particular job, both here and in my former job in working as the communications director for the governor in Mississippi, I would actually tell the reporter, I can give you a better informed interview if you will give me about 5 or 10 minutes. Let me go back to my office, refer back to my notes, and I'll meet you back right out here in the middle of the rotunda. There is nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Establish an interview setting. You remember that brand I was talking about? Think about that brand when you're thinking about the interview setting. Clear your desk, close the door. Use notes. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. A lot of times I've seen elected officials, especially if they have a staff member, if they're doing a broadcast interview, the staff will be holding up particular, 3 or 4 main points that they're wanting the elected official to talk about. So again, nothing wrong with that whatsoever. 3 to 5 main points or takeaways. Again, you got to think about what you're wanting to convey and connect with your constituents. What are the main takeaways on that piece of legislation that you're working with? Record the interview. You see right there in that particular photo right there, a lot of people with their different recorders and such out. Again, even you, if you're being interviewed, there is nothing wrong with holding out your iPhone or whatever, Android or whatever. There's some great applications out there. The one I particularly use is called Voice Memo. This has helped me immensely, tremendously on a number of times, especially again, back in my time working for the governor. We would be doing an interview. I would be holding out my phone. I would be recording the interview. I would look at the advanced story that would be coming across the AP wire, and I'd be like, whoa, that is not what he said. So I'd go back and listen to the interview, and sure enough, it was not what the governor had said. What was I able to do? I was able to actually send that whole recording back to that reporter and say, hey, start listening at 3:45 to 4:30. This is exactly what he said. You can't argue with that. So I look forward to seeing your update in your story. Talk slowly. Ladies and gentlemen, personally, that's something I have a little trouble with sometimes myself. But if you can, it's always to talk a little bit slowly, talk a little bit more accurately. Nothing wrong with that. Next slide. I always like to tell people, think of it as a story. What, again, are you trying to convey to your audience? Your audience, think of your constituents. What again, are you trying to, how are you trying to add a personal attachment? Why should they have passion behind this piece of a legislation? Why is that important? Try to focus your message on people. Always talk about the people. And we're going to be going a little bit further in some other slides where I use key words that, again, go back to talking about the people. And offer a visual or audio. Ladies and gentlemen, there has been a lot of cutbacks with the media recently. A lot of times I will ask the reporter, hey, look, to kind of help tell your story a little bit, I've got a great photo you can use, or I've got a great video you could use for some B-roll. Would you like that? And again, ladies and gentlemen, there is nothing wrong with that. Next slide. I love this slide because it's always my favorite. The other night, in fact, this happened. I was watching, I can't remember if it was CNN or Fox or one of them, and it was a very important interview. In fact, I think it was something to do with the CIA. And the person that they were interviewing, God bless them, they had this tie on. And ladies and gentlemen, all I could do was focus on that tie. So again, think about some solid patterns. Dark equals thin. The gentleman over there, right there, I remember seeing this interview a couple months ago, and I mean, great jacket, but again, I have no idea what he was talking about because I was focused on that jacket. And then my buddy Mick Jagger, who doesn't love Mick Jagger? Well, the problem is that, as I say, you don't Mick Jagger the mic. And what I mean by that is that you're going to come in contact with broadcast reporters that are a solo team. They're serving as the interviewer, they're serving as the videographer, and they're also serving as the editor. So basically look at it as a 3-in-1. And because of that, they're going to ask you to hold the mic. And ladies and gentlemen, we want to see those pearly whites. So do not hold that mic up to the face. Think about holding it to your chest. Next slide. My favorite, anticipate the worst. The toughest question will be asked. If you dread it, you'll get it. Be prepared. Next slide. Now, in the next couple points here, I'm going to go through some different blocking and bridging. In fact, Berkeley is going to help me out in a few moments with some questions that I think you may come in contact with. But one thing about it is try not to ignore or evade the question. Reporters, they will smell that. Try to, again, address the topic of a question. And we've got some points coming up in a few moments. Asked about a problem, talk about a solution. And then my favorite, no comment. Ladies and gentlemen, why you do not want to say no comment, I always tell people, where there's smoke, there's fire. So if you say no comment, that translates into the reporter, whoop, there might be fire somewhere. So be careful not to say no comment, but be able to say why you can't comment. Next slide. All right, now this is where I'm going to ask my deputy, Berkeley, who she'll be talking a little bit about social media in a few moments. Now, again, these are some particular ways that you're able to take a question from a reporter and kind of spin it back to what you're wanting to talk about. Also kind of pay attention to some of the key words that I'm using. Berkeley, take it away.
So I hear the legislation on minimum wage has no chance in passing. Is that correct?
I think what you're really asking is, our state willing to be competitive and pay our people, our constituents, the amount they deserve? The answer is yes. We owe it to our people and to our state.
So the speaker told me that if the state adopts this kind of bill, it will regret it later. Do you agree with this?
You know, the real issue here is, if this state doesn't adopt this legislation, it will regret it later. Taxpayers will be out millions of dollars.
Now, given the fact that industry and general public is against the committee's position on this, why do you keep trying?
I don't know about that, but what I do know is that our state listening tour gave us a tremendous feedback from the taxpayers. And one thing we learned is that they support our move to create new jobs in the state.
Well, I hear from a couple of people here in the Capitol that you were going on an all taxpayer expense paid trip to Fiji. Is that correct?
And ladies and gentlemen, you will get asked this. Just the opposite is true. Yes, I'm going on a trip, and that I'm paying for it out of my own pocket. Again, ladies and gentlemen, these are a number of ways. I used a ton of these back again, especially in my former job, working in the Senate and then also in the governor's office, where again, you're able to take certain things that the reporter, they're not going to like it, of course, but then you're able to go back to the central point that you're trying to make, not them. If you move it on to the next slide. These again are some just additional ones that I'm not going to hit on. The one that I really love the best is let me make one thing perfectly clear. That's almost like the last point of the line of question when the reporter just keeps on going and going and going. I always like to say, let me make one thing clear, is that we will not be doing X, Y, and Z, or that we will be addressing X, Y, and Z. Next slide. Now, communication trends. All right, this is an important section in my personal opinion. As you see, these are all entities, or let me say outlets, media outlets that we know, we watch, we read every single day. In my opinion, these are outlets that are held by journalistic standards. These are the journalists that are working at these entities. 9 times out of 10, or let me say 99.9% of them have gone to journalism school. Next slide. There we go. Now, I love this one. I know why I'm talking. Y'all are going to go to this Crooks and Bandits here, and go check that out. It's actually a funny site. These, what I like to call them, are self-proclaimed journalists. These are sites that are popping up. There's probably, I know in my home state of Mississippi, there's about 5 of these. Also in Kentucky, there's about 3 or 4. I can go on and on and on. These are individuals that, are not happy with the process of, if you please, and they all of a sudden, or let me say overnight, said, you know what, I'm going to start a webpage and I'm going to be a reporter and I am going to report on what's happening at the state capitol. And ladies and gentlemen, that does present a couple issues, and I'm going to break out some of those issues in the next couple slides real quick. Now, I always like to call these as the Bill of Rights. You as an interviewee, you have the right to know the topic, okay? You have the right to know the format. Again, we talked about buying time to be able to do a more informed interview. You have the right to answer, have time to answer the question. Correct misstatements on site. That is key, ladies and gentlemen. Use notes and record the interview. The other thing that I always like to tell people that you have a lot of opportunity here also is to ask the reporter, who else will you be interviewing for this story? I ask the reporters that a lot for NCSL because in my mind, I am looking to make sure that that reporter is doing a well-balanced story and to make sure that we're not getting put in any kind of right or left type story, if you please. Next slide. This one right here is, these are pretty self-explanatory, but I will say in my former job, I would have elected officials come up to me and be like, Nick, I want to know the questions in advance. And I'd be like, Senator, sorry, that's just not how it works. See the story in advance. Change your quotes. Edit the story, expect your view to be the only view, and demand the article be published. Ladies and gentlemen, those are just things that just you will not have that opportunity. I will say, though, the little bit of difference, if you want to talk about trade publications, a lot of time trade publications will show you the story in advance or the questions in advance. But mainstream media, at least in my career, I have never had the opportunity to edit the story, change quotes, or see the story in advance. So just be looking for that. Next slide. And then, of course, these are just some tactics and terminology. There's our Vice President for NCSL, President-elect for NCSL, Speaker of Hawaii. The irrelevant questionnaire, machine gun questioning, and the golden pause. I'm going to go real quick to the machine gun questioning, specifically foot tapping. In my former job, I would have this particular reporter that would come up to the governor and start talking to him. And probably about, I don't know, 1 or 2 questions in, I could tell that he was, again, kept on asking the same question, but in a different tone or a different way. And then all of a sudden, this reporter would start tapping their foot. And it just irritated the governor. It irritated me so much that when one of my last few days there, I took this reporter out to lunch and I asked them specifically, I said, all right, let's talk about foot tapping. Is that something that you mean to do, or just be honest, is it something that's just a nervous habit? And this reporter actually said back to me, said, well, I seem to always get your boss a little off target, didn't I? And I was like, yes, you did. So just know that they have different ways of going about to make you a little nervous or either get you off target. Not saying that all media are like that, but you might encounter them. And then the golden pause. Woo! Be careful. I know there are a lot of extroverts out there, ladies and gentlemen. Otherwise, you wouldn't run for office, right? So be careful of the golden pause. That is when you're talking to somebody and all of a sudden they just be quiet and they're just looking at you. And what do? We want to fill that void, right? Be careful with that. I know, in every instance that I have been a part of in a briefing or whatever, that golden pause tended to get us in trouble every single time. So be careful of that. Next slide. And then you remember that slide where we're talking about the mainstream media and the self-proclaimed media? That's the reason this slide is very, very important, because there are different definitions of these four type entities right here: off the record, not for attribution, background, and deep background. Real quick, ladies and gentlemen, if you're going to use one of these, you have to state that up front, okay? You cannot have a 30-minute conversation with a reporter and then say, oh, that was off the record, or that was on background. Ladies and gentlemen, that does not happen. So be very, very careful. I know what I do, again, in my job with NCSL, especially with the elections that just ended, and we would be talking to reporters. A lot of times I would start off and tell the reporter, hey, look, let's spend the first part of this and talk on background and on background only. You can't quote me. And then let's decide what questions you may have at the end, and either I or someone else on our team can help you out. So really think about that as you're dealing with the media and making sure that they understand the definition of what you think on background, not for attribution, or deep background is. And then the rule of silence: never say or write anything to a journalist you don't want to read in the newspaper, see on television, or hear on the radio. So where this comes into play, ladies and gentlemen, is that and especially, like, I'll pick on my home state of Mississippi. We had a very small Capitol press corps. I got to know my reporters extremely well, and became very, very good friends with them. So it was very easy for me to sometimes let my guard down a little bit and be a little personal with them in an email. This sometimes doesn't always play right. I have more friends than you can imagine that have taken that relationship and responded in a way to a reporter here, even in DC, and that reporter took a screenshot of that and then put it on social media. Needless to say, that staffer no longer works for that elected official. So I would be very careful. Certainly there's nothing wrong with having a good relationship with journalists, go to lunch with them, et cetera, et cetera. I highly advise that. I do that even in my job now with NCSL, but also still have your guard up. Just like you've got a job to do and keeping your brand safe, they're doing the same thing for the entity that they're working for as well. And then my top four: keep calm and carry on. Number two, remember your brand. I think you've seen a very big theme here. Don't forget your brand. This will follow you throughout your career, which, guess what, hits on number three: it's public. So, ladies and gentlemen, when you decide to run for, U.S. Senator or U.S. Congressman or Governor, or whatever it may be in the future, remember, it will follow you throughout your career. And then, of course, last but not least, which will lead into the other part of our presentation today, use social media during a crisis. It can be your friend. So now I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Berkeley Teat to talk a little bit about social media.
Well, thank you, Mick. And I will take it from there. Me and my friend Mike here. Couldn't help it, y'all. I wanted to use a couple of GIFs throughout this. You're going to see a little bit of fun in there with the information. But as Mick said, Megan Stacy, my name is Berkeley Teat. I'm a public affairs specialist, social media guru. And Mick did, congratulations again. We are so happy to have you here, and thank you for joining us. Mick did point out a couple of things that I'm going to reiterate throughout my segment of the presentation, which is building on your brand and creating that narrative of who you will be as an elected official. And I am going to push that a bit as well. If social media can be a part of that narrative, I hope that you can pick up some things from this that can help that out. That's why I'm here. And to do that, I'm going to address the whys of social media, and that will include some tricks of the trade that I've picked up, as well as some best practices that I hope y'all can take from here. And if you can't pick up, I'm from the South as well, so you get that's where that dynamic duo of the y'all comes in. So, all right. First, we have our first poll for social media, and my question will pop up in a minute, I think. All right, so how many of you use social media? I think we have a few seconds to answer this. Hopefully, we'll see some.
Votes are coming in. Put it in there. Is it all day, every day? You have no idea what it is. We've got several options here. We've got about 75% of the vote in now, and I will stop polling in about 3 seconds. All right, here are the results.
All right, so from what I can see, all day, every day, take by a date a few times a week. So you're in good company, y'all. My friend Tom here, if anyone is a Parks and Recreation fan, I thought this was a fun use to say that you are part of a collective of just about a quarter of the population in the entire world, not just the country, the world. We have about just under 1.8 billion people are active on Facebook daily. And collectively combined with Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat, you're looking at half the world's population daily on social media. Now, how does that relate to y'all? Well, elected officials are also on social media. And we did a recent number, we ran some recent numbers. Just about 53% are on Facebook, and just under 70% of elected officials, and that's state legislators, are on Twitter. So I pulled a couple of examples here. We have the Speaker of Massachusetts, Speaker Bob DeLeo, as well as the Senate Pro Tem, Senator Farrell Hale. And a couple of other things that I want to point out that y'all may not have been aware of is not just individuals, but also chambers and caucuses and libraries are also on social media. So here I have the Kentucky Senate Democrats, I have the Alabama GOP, the Louisiana Legislative Research Library, and my home state, the Georgia Budget and Research Office. So as I said, it's not just elected officials, and I want to make sure wherever your home state is, are you following your state? I've included a link here, and I'm happy to provide that afterwards, but NCSL has a web page that actually we follow the legislative social media sites, whether that is a website itself, a Facebook, a Twitter, an Instagram, anything like that. We try and keep updated on that. And your legislative staff and agencies are updating folks as well, utilizing social media. So moving on from the who to looking at what, my biggest thing that I like to say is let's start with a plan. As we said, we want to make sure we're building a narrative, and that goes from press to social media. So I like to have a plan. I've included an example here. Now, special events, cross communications, short and long term. This example here, I just pulled from something we did recently. This is just an example of a special event plan that you can look at. This is just a one-day event. Just in the morning, we knew that folks were going to be on the Hill ahead of time. We had some state legislative leadership meeting on the Hill. And so we had posts pre-planned out, and we knew the handles of the state legislators, as well as the partners that we worked with, such as the National Governors Association, who were well aware of that ahead of time. And then part of planning as well is cross communications. So part of the reason Mick and I work well together is because he's press and I'm social media, and we like to work, and we work very collectively on that. And a big thing we like to do is cross communications. Elected officials also do that daily. So I pulled this actually just this morning. Speaker Tim Moore from North Carolina actually just shared this. This is an article that came up where it talked about the work that North Carolina legislature is doing. So he actually shared some work that they had been talking to a reporter that went into this article, and he shared that on his Twitter page. Another example of cross communications is broadcasting, which you're going to see a bit more of in my presentation, but that includes anything from a Facebook Live to, if you utilize Instagram or Twitter, they also have live video feeds as well. So continuing, what do you post as far as planning? Short-term planning and long-term planning look a little bit different. I talked about special events. I talked about cross communications, press and broadcast efforts. Now, short-term planning, let's say you have an event coming up. For example, I pulled an example, Senator from Pennsylvania, Senator Santasiero. He actually has an event that's coming up on next Tuesday on the 8th for caregivers resources. And he's going ahead and getting the word out. And this is something I can't stress enough. If you're going to be on a panel, if you're going to be doing, meeting with city council, anything like that in your district, utilize social media and go ahead and get that out there. Whatever platform you may be on, it's a great resource to go ahead and get folks engaged, especially in this environment when a lot of us are virtual. Another example I pulled is right now, it's December, we might have just celebrated Thanksgiving, we're moving into the holidays. We may be offline, but social media is not. So if you do create a profile, whether it's on Facebook or Twitter, know that social media does not stop going. Make sure you're engaging with your constituents. Post something about Happy Thanksgiving. We just posted something recently about Veterans Day. We were off, it was a federal holiday, but we want to make sure, as well as Speaker Robin Voss from Wisconsin, he was engaging with folks. He may not have been online, but he posted something about Thanksgiving in his district. All right, continuing this, looking at long-term plans. And this is actually a pretty a way for me to spin what we've been all seeing this year. We did experience a big shift this year. I know that as far as long-term planning, Mick and I we've already looking at setting things for 2021. I know that legislative offices and staff are looking towards 2021. People had to rework what they were doing due to the pandemic. Now, as you can see here, and that's my note, is that your plans might change, but utilize social media under these circumstances. I pulled a couple of examples here. Assemblywoman Irwin in California, she's notifying folks that there are testing sites in her area. The same thing with State Rep Dan Frankel, he notified folks the same thing. I see this message a good bit across social media, whether it's this or something along these lines, especially in a long-term plan like this. And don't be afraid to repeat posts. You see that they posted this, they may post this multiple times. Now, one person may see this in your district today, but they may not be online tomorrow, but someone else may be. So don't be afraid to do that. And my trick of the trade as far as what to post: engage with people that are online. It may not be a part, their comment you may not have expected, but that's okay. And folks want to see that you are active. So I've included a couple of examples here. Senator Jane Nelson, she actually shared her local police department. Some folks won an award for service, and she congratulated their first responders. And I thought that was a really great example of working in her community, even when it's not directly related to what she did, just engaging with folks that are right there. And then don't be afraid to get creative. So another example I have here is Senator Lavassa. I always butcher her name, but our senator from New Hampshire, Senator Lavassa. She actually shared one of her colleagues, who is her final day in the New Hampshire Senate. She shared a congratulations. She worked with her colleague. She said, "Thank you so much. It was so great to work with you." And that's just collaborating with your colleagues in your chamber. All right, so hopefully some folks get this. This is my time for a breakout. We just talked about ways that you can engage, ways that you can plan out what you're going to say and make it applicable to your role in your district and legislature. So this is my breakout. This is my fun portion of the game. And Stacy, if you want to go ahead and
hit Berkeley. Mick, before I jump folks into breakouts for just 2 minutes, we had a question pop in that I think is a good one for the group to hear. The question is, how do you know if your social media is actually working? How do you know it's actually reaching your constituents and making a difference?
So that's a great question. It is a big question, but I will give one example, and this is just a bit more free tool that they use. It's analytics or insights. And one thing that you can do if you do have one of these platforms, and I will actually have a screen grab about this later on, is you can go to these insights and see how many people are following you. You can see what time they're engaging. You can see what posts engaged more with folks than others. And I actually do this on a daily basis in my role. I'll take a look at numbers at the end of every month, and I'll see, what issues really matter to our members. And I would encourage folks to do that as well, is look at what comments folks were making on what posts, if it was something about education, or if it was something about just a legislative update. That's a big suggestion I would have, is that's a way that you can see how things are working.
That's a great one. And then we have one follow-up question to that, and then you all can address these issues in your breakouts too. But when someone engages and then continues to engage, as you suggested, it seems like they just attract trolls. So how do you spend all of your time not deflecting the trolls, but actually putting out and engaging with constituents?
Someone got ahead of my presentation. So a bit later on, which I'll touch on a bit more at that point, is I talk about best practices and some do's and don'ts. And one of my don'ts is do not feed the trolls. I always like to say, if we're building a brand, we're building a narrative, you're focusing on the positive role that you are playing in your legislature, the things that you're getting done. And a lot of these comments, especially from someone who consistently posts, may not be directed to what you're doing. And so I usually say, do not engage, do not blame that, but that's a great question.
All right, thanks. I'm gonna put you all into breakouts now, and we're gonna give you just 2 or 3 minutes. It'll be a really quick, short breakout. Feel free to continue brainstorming these questions. You'll be in the room with your fellow newly elected legislators. So feel free to bounce ideas off each other. What did you use in the campaign that might translate into your official position once you take the oath of office? And what other questions are outstanding? So let the 2 minutes start now. If anyone is having any trouble joining their breakout room, let me know. You should have a pop-up on your screen that says join breakout room. You can click that. And Berkeley, I have several other questions that have popped up in the chat, but I'll save it until the end of your presentation.
Great, I love questions.
Okay, I'm going to give them the 60-second warning. And we should see everybody flooding back in about 30 seconds. Okay, it looks like most everyone is back from the breakouts. Welcome back and continue on, Berkeley.
All right. Well, I hope folks enjoyed that breakout. I know I'm a very kinesthetic learner, and so I loved the idea of a breakout because I always want to apply what I've been learning. And I know that I'm giving y'all a lot of information, but it's also a good thing for you to talk about ideas that you may have already had either through your campaign or wherever it was that you can share with your colleagues. So I hope that was helpful. I hope you enjoyed the Atari breakout graphic from the 80s. All right, so we've talked about the who and the what as far as social media. Now, where do you post? And before you say, wow, that's a lot of platforms, I know there is an endless amount of social media platforms, and some of them aren't even on here. And before you get too overwhelmed, I like to say, what is your message and who is your audience? I know that with, for example, my local state legislator and senator in Northern Virginia, they both have an Instagram and a Twitter, but they don't have a Facebook. And I know that Mick, you and I were talking earlier, and I think we had talked about, you had an interesting suggestion about that if you wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, one thing to kind of think about, because especially with the new census numbers that will be coming out, one way that you can kind of utilize the new census numbers that are coming out is basically looking at your district. So when they come out, look at them, look at the median, the age group, the household income, those type things, and then compare those to the platforms of the average age groups that they are. That will kind of help you in deciding which one you should be spending more time with. We did this, and again, a couple of years ago with the last census, again, deciding should we be spending more time and more effort on, at that time, it was a particular senator friend of mine, should he be on Twitter, should he be on Facebook, should he be on Instagram? And instead, what we could tell because of his demographics of his district, because they were a certain age, they were a certain median income, et cetera, that we thought Facebook would be more applicable for his usage. So we put more emphasis and more work on his particular Facebook page. So just kind of one example of using those census numbers and how they can help you.
And y'all, I'm a really big fan of numbers. Like I had said, we talked about that question earlier about how do you know if something's working, and what Mick just said, I think hits right on the money. Numbers don't lie, and census numbers, they're right there about what's going on in your district. I know from experience, just having worked with analytics a good bit, your younger folks, anything from millennials and Generation Z, which are now, I think, two of your larger voting blocks, they tend to navigate towards Instagram and TikTok. Now, Generation X, baby boomer generation, those folks I tend to see a bit more on Facebook and some on Twitter, just so in case you wanted it's a bit of insight right there. Now I'm going to talk about where. And so one thing I have here is, I used an example. This is Senator Tom Keene from New Jersey. And I say, this is my trick of the trade for this, is when in doubt, if you have a strong singular message, for example, Senator Keene has, there's a 2020 Virtual Marketplace Exchange Summit going on. I took these screen grabs, one from his Facebook and second from his Twitter page. It's the same message and it's a strong message, and he put it on multiple platforms. So that both supports that singular message, as well as don't be afraid to repeat a post, as I had said earlier. Now, Mick and I were talking earlier, and there is a good point that this does apply for some things, but not for other things. It is important to remember that Twitter is for more instant updates, and Facebook is more for your singular major updates. So keep that in mind. So looking at when do you post? And like I said, I know there's a lot of information. I hope y'all are taking notes, and I'm always happy to answer some questions. But on Facebook, I know we were talking about what to post, but I think this is important. When we look at Facebook, I just pulled these numbers a couple of days ago. These are global engagement numbers. The strongest time to post, or that engagement is active, we saw those nearly 2 billion people on Facebook. The strongest numbers are midweek, morning to mid-afternoon. And that's on Facebook. On Twitter, it's a little bit different, all week, midday. And that's where, so you see right there, the darkest part, that signifies when you have your largest engagement. Now you might say, but Berkeley, this is global engagement. This is not my district. I know. So I got ahead of y'all on that one. So I actually went to NCSL's page, and I went, and this is for, keep in mind, a public page. So ours is a non-government page. For a public official page, you can also do this. And I took a screen grab of our page. You can see right here, if you go down and you decide to have a Facebook profile as a public official, you will have the option to have an insights page. And that's what I had been talking about earlier with one of the questions. And when I looked at Facebook, our Facebook results, it actually is a little bit different from global engagement numbers. It is every day. It's not just midday or midweek. We have active engagement on our page every single day. And I think that's important. So when you do have a profile, understand that your district may be different from the larger picture. And then we are not just midday. It is 6 a.m. to 10 to 8 p.m. It is all day. And so we like to target that time. So I'm going to move on to best practices. We've covered the whys of social media, as I call them, the who, the what, the where, and the when. Now, how is my favorite. My mother's an English teacher, so I like to do my whys, but how do you ensure engagement with constituents with best practices? So I have online and offline practices, and under offline practices, some state policies and guidelines that I think that I want to make sure that y'all are aware of. So for Facebook, one thing that I strongly encourage, you don't have a limitation of characters. You can post paragraphs on Facebook. I do not encourage that. I would like y'all to look at 80 characters or less, 80 to 100. And we actually have, numbers to back this up from both our page as well as from other folks that we've talked about, other state legislators. And one example I have is Georgia Representative Terry England. He's actually really great at his Facebook posts. And something he did here, if you take a look, this is one of my favorite things he's done, is he actually shared, he didn't say anything, he just shared something going on in his district. You have a local, I think it's a pecan farm. I may be getting ahead of myself here, but you have a local farm product that he shared and wanted to make sure people are aware of that's going on in his district. I mean, it's photos. And as you can see, photos are 4 times more engaging than just posting words. And one thing I can say, and I said this earlier, is quality over quantity. Less is more when it comes to Facebook. When I talk about Twitter, it may be a little different, but when it comes to Facebook, work with playing 1 post a day, seeing if that's engaging. You can try and go up to 2, but I encourage quality over quantity here. And finally, capacity, schedule ahead, which brings me to unique Facebook tools. One thing you can do with Facebook, which I really love, there's a free tool that you can utilize as far as a public officials page. You can schedule posts ahead. So let's say you get to legislative session and you are in meetings 12 hours a day and you do not have time. If you have limited legislative staff, you don't have time to upload things during the day. That's okay. Go in maybe Sunday or Saturday and schedule things out directly through Facebook. It's a free tool, and I encourage y'all to look into that. Another thing is photo albums. You saw Representative England did a great job at that, and you're able to do that on your page as well. And then live broadcasts. I brought this up a little earlier, and actually Senator Bob Duff, who's the majority leader in Connecticut, does a really great job at utilizing Facebook Live. And you can do this. It's another free tool on Facebook. And I know that Instagram and Twitter have it, but I love the Facebook Live feature because you can schedule it ahead and folks will know that it's coming. And especially, again, in this virtual environment, this is a great tool for folks to put a name to a face. Now, looking at Twitter, it's a little bit different. There is a limitation to your characters, 240 or less. But now, what I said earlier, try and limit what you say. Try and limit your characters. I like to look at, again, less is more. So you can see here that Senator Michael Testa, he actually, from Pennsylvania, I think he had 1 or 2 sentences, and 2 of them are enjoy and stay healthy. So sentences, but keeping it short and to the point rather than having paragraphs. And once again, photos increase your engagement. So here he actually retweeted Governor Murphy's photos. And what that does, and this brings me to another point, is he capitalized on a partnership in a state. And I like to say, always engage with your colleagues as well as folks in your district. And the biggest difference, though, between Facebook and Twitter, and I said it earlier, is Twitter is more instantaneous. Let's say you're on site, you're at I know that Georgia has a really great fair, state fair I always love to go to. And so I know I think Mick's been to one. And so I always say, you know, if you're there and you're talking with people, update people, put some photos up. You can do it every hour, every 30 minutes, you can update folks. Now I say about every hour. On Facebook, let's say you went to the same event, look at posting a collective album or group of photos and talking about the event as a whole. So that would be a good difference there. And so for Twitter tools, a big thing is threads. As you can see here, both of the examples that I have, Speaker Hortman and Speaker Sexton, they used threading, which is you make one comment on Twitter. You can actually comment on that. You click the comment button, the little bubble on the left-hand side, and you can thread that. So if you're limited to 240 characters, but you have a few things to say, you can actually create a thread. And oftentimes I've utilized this feature, and it's actually unique to platforms. News updates as well. Speaker Hortman did this really well here. There was a news update that she actually not only used a news update, but she threaded that. So she did two of my tools in one. And finally, polls. Twitter has a really great feature for polls. So we've been seeing polls in this presentation, but on Twitter, you can also do that. For example, if you were to post something that said, in the upcoming session, what are you most looking forward to? So whether it's policy issues on education, on infrastructure, you can actually share that and see what folks are interested in. And speaking of polls, what tools are you interested in that we may have just talked about, whether you've utilized them or whether you have not and you may want to utilize them in the future? I think I just got ahead of your question, Stacey. I'm sorry.
All right, I caught up to Berkeley. There's your question. Go ahead and tell us what you think you might use, what you might be brave enough to try out in your new role as an elected official. All right, we'll take a few more votes in here, and I'm going to end the polling.
All right.
The results. Looks like constituent polls are the most popular.
And you know what's always interesting is Mick and I always talk, and he's always talking about these polls. And I actually added this at the last minute to this. And so I actually really love that that's what y'all are most interested in. It is a great feature, and I highly encourage it. But as well as the other two, one thing I always say, and I think I just flipped ahead there, is to be creative. And this is a way you can do that. And all of these tools are already built in and available for you. So now let's move offline. And I know we're starting to get close to time, so I promise I'm going to try and keep it brief for y'all. So best offline practices. If, again, you can tell I'm a Parks and Recreation fan. Our friend Jerry here from Parks and Recreation was just trying to help out. And I say that's also a way that you utilize your staff and leadership because they want to help you, just like Jerry wanted to help Leslie. Know your state's guidelines, which we're going to get a little bit into, and then think before you post. Those are the do's and don'ts. So guidelines, these are not NCSL guidelines. These are actually your usage policies and site policies from legislatures and chambers. Many states do have these, and we actually have a web page on there, and I've put the link on there as well. You're more than welcome to look at that page, but I encourage you to make sure that to check and see if your state has these. And a great way to do that is to talk to your legislative staff or your legislative and caucus leadership. And I'll show a couple of examples of these. So one, a usage policy for Alaska legislature. They have a pretty extensive social media usage policy. I'm not going to read through it, but as you can see here, they're talking about, follow acceptability use policies, always stop, pause, and think before posting, and post meaningful, respectful comments. So you have to be just watchful of what happens. This is where things become different from being just an individual to an elected official on social media. And then a site policy, this is the Utah House platform. This is how you use a legislature webpage or a site page itself, not necessarily as an individual. The next offline practices is the first is separate yourselves, which I hinted at just a bit earlier. Now there's a difference I would like to think between personal and elected official page. I've consistently stated Facebook has a great public official profile, and you can utilize insights, and you can post updated Facebook lives, utilize your elected official account for that. And I strongly advise you to keep your personal and elected official accounts separate. However, that's why I also showcase those social media guidelines and policies, because many states actually do have that requirement there. And then another thing about this is, what about you though? Because I know I haven't really gotten into this. So just a quick update and example I wanted to showcase here. I talked about that profile. You might be wondering if you haven't built a Facebook or a Twitter and you're thinking, okay, so this is interesting, maybe I want to do this. I actually get referrals a good bit about this. What do I put on it? And so Speaker Kotek actually has a really great breakdown on her Facebook page. She has her role as the Oregon House Speaker. She has her district, and she included actually towns and areas in her district. She has a direct link to the Oregon Legislature webpage, and she has her email for constituents that can contact her. And I didn't even have this on here. She has her link to her Twitter account, some cross promotion. Now our final part of best offline practices, and this is where Mick and I are going to bounce back and forth on each other, is our do's and don'ts, our think before you post. I know we had a question about this earlier that was about feeding trolls, and I'm just going to reiterate, do not fan the flames. I know that as an individual, I sometimes can get frustrated when I see things, but I encourage you to continue to post on behalf of your legislature and your chamber. And then banning and blocking followers. I know Mick brought something up earlier, but can you remind us what you had said about that?
Yeah, so of course, in just about all 50 states, there is some type of lawsuit where an individual has brought it upon either a statewide elected official or a state legislator, where they have banned or blocked that constituent or that taxpayer, if you please, from their social media account. So this is where it goes back to, and I must stress that it would be very important, first of all, to review your social media policy in your legislative chamber. Not only that, but I would also implore upon you to talk to either like your Senate or your House legal team to see again if there is any policies in place and that such. Also to understand your state ethics laws. There are a handful of states in the country that essentially the courts have ruled through these cases that the member's social media account is an extension of your office. Therefore, you cannot block or ban a particular user. So be very, very, very mindful of that. That way we do not see you in an upcoming lawsuit or anything. So yeah, I think that was my point on that, Berkeley.
Great, and I couldn't have said that better myself, especially about the bit about the legal counsel as well. And that brings me to posting pictures without permission. And a great example of that is, you do have photographers in the Capitol. Let's say you have a picture that they've taken while you're at the Capitol, while you're on the floor, and then you share that on your personal page. There may actually be an issue there because that individual is technically that's his job that he works at the state legislature, and now you're using it on your personal platform. So you could have a bit of an ethics issue there. And then posting private conversations. Hopefully that's a bit self-explanatory, but I always like to say, something may look like it's a really great idea. You and a colleague are talking back and forth about a great policy coming up or a great idea that you had and you want to share it. Please look at refraining from doing that. I've already said this a couple of times. I'm just going to quickly reiterate. When in doubt, refer to your chamber and caucus leadership. They have a great deal of experience that they're there for. Check your links. I have a couple of images here, one from AP. Previously, the CIA director actually shared a link that was not what he intended to. And this often comes in if you maybe don't have a plan and you just have to put something out pretty quickly and you got the link wrong. Always double check that. And then when in doubt, reach out. I think that just reiterates referring to your leadership. And then there is a hide feature. And I always like to say, first, check your guidelines, check your leadership, but there is a feature. I know folks a lot of the times talk about banning or blocking followers. If you see that constant person posting consistently, you can technically hide the comments from other folks seeing that. But I always say that that is a suggestion for me. but always go and check with your leadership first and make sure that that is something that you are able to do in your state.
Hey,
All right.
Berkeley.
Oh, yep.
Berkeley, one real quick thing, because we do get asked this question a lot from members. And again, it even feeds back into the feeding the trolls, if you please. One thing that I have worked with a lot of elected officials with, and particularly a friend of mine, a state senator back in Mississippi, he had a particular constituent that was just going on and on and on, negative comments, if you please, on his particular Facebook page. And what we did and what I advised him to do was basically do a private message to that individual saying, hey, thank you so much for reaching out. Here's my email address, or here's my phone number. Can we talk a little bit further about it offline if you don't mind? That actually worked in this particular situation. I can't say it works 100% of the time, as you can imagine, but what you're doing is you're taking that conversation and what that individual is saying, you're taking them off of a public domain and you're putting it more so in a private conversation that you're going to have with them. You're kind of empowering them, if you please. I know that's a lot easier said than done, but sometimes 4 or 5 minutes on the phone with somebody like that can really help you out.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I know that we want to wrap things up, just kind of like what Mick did. I'm going to do top 5 just so that we can recap what we had discussed. Know the numbers as far as how many people are on social media, and that it is a great tool, but also utilize and capitalize off of your numbers. I know we talked about how do we know if it's working? Make sure that you use those tools and you can see that actually yourself. Making a plan. We talked about short-term, long-term, special events, cross communications. Make sure that you look ahead, especially as we're coming up into the upcoming session. Getting creative and engaging. I know that this year has thrown everyone for a loop, and I don't think that's going to change in the next few months. And this is the perfect opportunity for getting creative and engaging. And I hope that we showcased a few different options for you that you can build into your narrative. Knowing the policies, I can't reiterate enough that every state, their caucus, their leadership has guidelines for the most part, and I strongly encourage you to look at those. And then building your best practices. I know that I provided a few best practices. Mick and I both provided some tips and tricks of the trades, but make sure that you start to build these into your practices. As I know Mick said earlier, this is going to be, you are now an elected official, and moving forward, this is what you will be seen as. So make sure that you start that now. And I think that's a wrap for us.
Thanks so much, Mick and Berkeley. We have lots of questions in the chat, which I know we will all stick around and answer. So if you guys can hang out with us for a few more minutes, we will get to those questions. If you can't, we totally understand. We're at our hour, and if you have to jump off, we get it. We have one more of these in the series. Our last one is next Tuesday, December 8th, and it's about working with lobbyists, especially in this virtual environment. So please feel free to join us for that, same time. And you can register for that event on the NCSL website as well. Thanks again, Mick and Berkeley, and thanks you all for joining us. And I will jump straight into the questions. You can hang out with us to get those answered. Okay, a few kind of easy questions that bounce off of Berkeley, what you were just talking about. Does the banning and blocking of people go for personal pages as well, or is that delineated out in the legislative policies that exist within the chambers?
I will say, I don't fully know if the banning and blocking on a personal like Twitter or Facebook page, I don't know about that. I mean, Mick, if you have any suggestions there.
Yeah, I would say to that, I think it's according to what you're using your personal page for. If you're using your personal page and you're putting anything to do with your role as a legislator, that, in my opinion, can be seen as an extension of your office. And if that ends up in a court case or something like that, and they see that you're posting official things onto your personal page, I would be extremely, extremely careful. Now, if you have a personal page and you're just putting grandkids photos and cooking ware and stuff like that up there, and travel photos, that's another thing. But you have to be able, in my personal opinion, I'm not a lawyer, but I think you would have to have a clear case of showing that your social media account has a history of not sharing official business on it. So be very careful of that.
I'm not going to add to that. I think that was great.
Yeah. And do you know, can you do polls on Facebook? You talked about some polls on Twitter. It seems like their constituents might be more active on Facebook.
I know we have not, but Mick is shaking his head that I think we can do polls on Facebook on pages.
Mhm. Yeah, so there's even applications that you can use that you can embed onto your Facebook page. And I apologize, I've got a blank on my mind at the moment. So my contact information and everything is right down there. Mick.Bullock at ncsl.org. I'd be happy to share any of those particular sites with you. But I see a number of individuals that I know, for example, when we were looking at putting together a criminal justice reform package back in Mississippi, we actually did a lot of social media polling. We used Twitter and we utilized Facebook. And we actually used those in a number of presentations where and then of course, according to whatever platform you're using, you can tell by the demographics, you can make sure that the people that are participating in the poll are living and residing in your state. So there's a number of tools that you can do with that. There's some really, really cool applications out there. Yes.
And this was a question that came out of the breakouts that we did, which is great. How does a newly elected legislator, freshman, low man on the totem pole, maybe has some staff, but maybe doesn't have any staff, how do they even make time to post? They're already drinking from the fire hose. So what are some good tips about just finding a couple minutes to even be active on social media?
That's a great question, I think. So I'll kick that one off. I know that I had hinted at it earlier. When we make a plan, at least as far as Mick and I, we plan ahead and we have everything preloaded for that week. Facebook allows you to do that. That tool's built in, and you can put your Facebook posts already in play. So you don't have to worry about, am I going to have time? I need to make sure I'm engaged. If that's Saturday or Sunday, you know what's coming up. If you know there's a vote a certain day, if you know you're going to be at a specific site, and you can go ahead and share a couple of things about that. And that way you're already good to go for the week. So actually, if you don't know that you're going to have time, just go ahead and plan ahead and build in some time on the weekend. Maybe if you find an hour or so. And that I think would be a great start if Mick has anything to add.
Yeah, so I'll just piggyback off of that and say, now, I can't say that every state or every caucus does this, but certainly talk to your leadership. Because a lot of times your leadership will, of course, have a communications team. And part of their job is putting together, like what Berkeley and I do for NCSL, and even what I used to do for the legislature back in Mississippi, is we would put together basically, hey, here is what the lieutenant governor is going to be messaging this week. We would love for you to help amplify this messaging. That is a great idea, because that also, what that does is that also shows that you're a part of the process as well. So really, if you've not had that or introduced yourself to the communications folks in your particular leadership or your particular leader in your party, now is the time to do that. They can be a extremely valuable tool to you. Again, part of my job back in the Senate in Mississippi was putting together that plan and then sending that to our Senate members and saying, hey, here's what we're going to be talking about this week. We'd love your help on that. So, and then going back to Berkeley's point, also the timed postings. A good friend of mine, she's a former state senator now, Deb Peters. She was the appropriations chair back in South Dakota. She was a busy person. She was like, Mick, I do not have time to do all of this. So what she would honestly do is use the program. And I think I saw a question earlier about Hootsuite, but she used a third-party vendor that helped timed all of her postings. So on Sunday afternoon, she basically would take whatever she was wanting to talk about Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and she would go ahead and put her postings in there. That way, if she's in a committee meeting and everything, she did not have time to tweet or have time to put things on Facebook. There was stuff that's going to be constantly generated over and over and over. Now, that's not to say she was on the Senate floor and like, oh man, we're debating Senate Bill 3250. And she put a tweet out specifically for that. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But what she was able to do is, as I say, she was able to feed the machine. She was able to show her constituents that she was constantly putting information out there. We use Hootsuite here at NCSL. It is a great tool. It's not only that, but also provides some really cool analytics as well if you're wanting to dive deep into that.
Thanks, guys. A couple more. This one is a little more in the weeds, but you might know the answer for it. Are there any copyright or royalty best practices regarding posting pictures or graphics on Facebook that you found online? Like, for example, do they have a set of royalty-free images that Facebook provides? Or, you know, how do you not get in trouble with posting pictures or graphics that you're not supposed to?
So I do know I had that slide earlier that said don't post pictures without permission. And I even am very cautious about this. Let's say that, you know, I see something that's online that's a great photo. Mick and I, you know, I will go and email a reporter, and sometimes they're fine with it. And sometimes I've gotten back, no, I don't want you to use that. And the thing is, you need to check on that. And I know, like I had used the example earlier, you do have photographers at the Capitol while you're working. You also have to be cautious about using those photos and making sure that it's okay to use as well. Mick, do you have addition?
Yeah, I would just say to that, especially, let me expand on that comment about the photos taken at the Capitol. Certainly, again, that goes back to having that conversation and making sure that those are okay. I know a particular state where again, at that time, a freshman legislator shared pictures from the House photographer onto their Facebook page, and then the Ethics Commission came back and said, no, you can't do that. That is not a proper use of the photo of taxpayer-funded photographer using it on your Facebook page. So again, that goes back to definitely asking permission. I would also say in your job, you're probably going to have the opportunity to tour a healthcare facility or an education, or a school. There are numerous laws out there for both of those. On the medical side, it's the HIPAA law, and of course on the education side. So certainly when you're touring a school, make sure that you talk to your contact or ask for the communications person. Because a lot of times what they will do is they'll send a photographer with you on your tour, and those will be pre-approved photos. So I'm being a little cautious, but I would say it's paid off a little bit in my career. So just being a little safety, if you don't mind.
Yeah, and I can't piggyback enough off of with the education and FERPA laws, especially if they're children in the photo or anything like that. I know that I've been the person sent with the camera before, and those photos have to be pre-approved. So as Mick said, be cautious there.
And the last thing I'll say that also is when you're out in your district, I remember a photo, I think her name was Aunt Ruby, and we took a photo with the governor and Aunt Ruby, and then I put that on social media, and Aunt Ruby's daughter was not happy that we used that. So again, asking for permission, and that was one instance that I did not ask permission. So certainly be mindful of that when you're taking pictures with your constituents as well.
And I will just add, you know, Facebook certainly does have some graphics that are pre-uploaded. So you could have some type of, let's just take Thanksgiving, for example, like a Thanksgiving background, and you could type your own message in. And that, of course, is pre-approved because it's already on the Facebook platform. Okay, we're going to take these two last questions and then we'll wrap it up. Can you restrict a poll on Facebook to a custom audience? Mick and Berkeley, correct me if I'm wrong. Does Facebook still have the ability to mark constituents that fall within your area? I know they used to be able to do that if people voluntarily gave their addresses.
So if I understand it correctly, I think what you're talking about, and this is also for many of you that did it just, again, that came from a campaign, if you ever bought, this plays in the conversation, if you buy an ad or buy a posting on social media, and let me give you an example. I will use NCSL, so I apologize, but at NCSL, we had our large summit in Nashville, Tennessee, and there was a particular session that we wanted to drive people to attend that session. What I did is I created the ad, created the posting, I got the address for the convention center, and I said, I want to reach out for a mile radius of this, and I want anybody that's on Facebook to see this ad. So that's one example. Now, how does this relate to me in my district? In the past, in other campaigns that I've done, basically what you do is you try to find if you've got a particular area of your district that you really need to hone in on, that you feel a little soft in, if you please. Find out, kind of look at that map and look at a central point. Look at a house that kind of is really kind of in the radius of that place. Let's say 429 Mary Street. Type in 429 Mary Street, and let's say you want to reach out. You want people within a 15 to 20 mile radius to see that particular posting. That is a great tool. I mean, that right there, your constituents will see that ad, and it's actually pretty limited in cost. So I highly advise that. So I hope that kind of answers your question a little bit, Stacy.
And the only thing I'll add to that, and I actually just checked to confirm, on Twitter with the polling, you can actually, you have 3 options. It can be for everyone, for people you follow, or people you mention. So not technically your followers, but people you follow. You can restrict it to that, or people that you mention. So those are options, but I will stress to keep in mind, if y'all saw a couple slides back, that you want to check and make sure that doesn't fall under your not banning or blocking followers, but restricting people that are constituents. That could be a great area.
And then last but not least, we have a tough question from a new member here. And how do I develop a brand? Well, certainly that's a big question. We actually offer a whole separate training on that. So we'd be happy to follow up with you directly and we can give you some hints. But just, Mick and Berkeley, do you have any just quick starting points for her?
You want to kick things off? You want me to?
Go ahead, Berkeley.
I think, first of all, let's say you don't have any social media as an elected official account on either side, go ahead and get started. If you know things that are coming up, such as the start of session, you know what certain meetings are coming up, you can go ahead and pre-plan for those. And then look back at what you may have done in your campaign. If you had pictures that were out in the area, you had them at schools, or, you were active out in your community, and that was engaging with folks. Carry that over into what you're doing now. So that engagement with folks doesn't stop just because you're starting session, and likely folks appreciated that. Right now, carry that over and just add in the work that you're doing on the floor as well. And then I will say, I'm gonna be honest, some of it is a learn as you go. And that is where your leadership and your caucus leadership come into play. And I always say, I learn a great deal from my leadership. So that may be Mick, that may be Stacy, but I always say folks that have even more experience than I do, and that may have had some tips for you, that have been in office for 2 or 3 terms, they may know even better, because I'm from Georgia. I'm not from Mississippi. I'm not from Colorado. I don't know the area as well, and it may be different there.
Yeah, so a couple things on building a brand. I remember, again, back, especially in my former job, first of all, let's go back to why you ran for the office that you're in now. What are you wanting to achieve? I remember working with a state representative friend of mine when they decided, hey, Mick, I'm going to run for office. And then what we did is we sat down and we said, all right, let's build that brand. Let's build over the next, if you're going to run for office and you get elected over the 4 years, what is your main thing that you want to help achieve? What is the main item, piece of legislation that you want to be known for? Is it education reform, criminal justice reform? Is it infrastructure? What is that? And then keep honing in on that message over the next 4 years. Let you own that. The other thing that I would mention also too is to think about, you had a campaign sign, you had a campaign look. Does that look translate into your official role? Making sure the color scheme, making sure of the fonts that you're using, making sure everything is consistent, the coloring, etc. I know Amy Skinner, our marketing person here at NCSL, is always on me about making sure that we're using the right color scheme and everything. But that is so important, because when somebody sees something, they're like, oh, that's Senator such and such, or that's Representative such and such. So again, over the next 4 year or 2 years of your term, think about, again, what is the main messaging that are main things that you're wanting to accomplish, hone in on those, make that a part of your brand. And then also, again, think about your public look, think about your header on Facebook or Twitter and everything. Make sure everything is in the same color scheme and looking like, so they know that that is your page. So I hope that helps out a little bit on branding. That could be a whole, that's a whole presentation right there.
It sure is. Thank you all very much for joining us today. We hope these are helpful, and we hope that we'll see you on Tuesday for our final orientation series about working with lobbyists. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks so much, y'all.
Thank you.